Lesson 10 is about triads. It's about triads.
Believe it or not, this is not actually a drawing of a snowman. It is in fact what we call a triad. So a triad has 3 notes, and each of the notes is 1/3 apart from the next. If we want to build our own triad, we can start on any note. So let's choose to start on G. So whatever note that you start on when you're building the triad is going to be called the root. Remember that a triad is built from thirds, so to find our next note, we need to go 1/3 up from the root. For right now, it doesn't matter what kind of third we do, so I'm just going to do a B natural above my G. And this second note in the triad is going to be called the third of the chord because it is 1/3 above the root. And then to find our final note in this triad, we're going to go 1/3 above the third. And that note is going to be called the 5th because it is 1/5 above the root. So in this particular triad, our root is G, our third is B, and our 5th is D. This triad is in what we call root position. Basically what that tells us is that the root of the chord is on the bottom, and the thing that's special about root position is that all of the notes are going to be either lines or spaces. There's not going to be a mix of both. So here we have all lines. But you can rearrange the notes in a triad, and that's called inverting it. So if we wanted to invert this triad, we might move this root, the G, up by 1 octave. Now it's the same triad because it uses the same pitches, but they're in a different order. So it's called first inversion because we only moved 1 note from the root position. So there's just 1 change to make. And in first inversion, the third of the chord is on the bottom. So notice that the names of each of the notes doesn't change even though they're in a new position. So this is still going to be the third of the chord. This will still be the 5th. And the root is now at the top. But we still have G is going to always be our root, B is going to always be our third, and D is going to always be our 5th in this triad. So just because they're in a new position doesn't mean that their names have changed. If we want to, we can go 1 step further in changing the position and go to what's called second inversion. And to do that, we're going to move this B up the octave. Again, so now we have the same notes as before, but in a new order. And this is second inversion because it took 2 moves to get from root position to here. So first we moved the G up the octave, and then we moved the B up the octave. So 2 of the notes moved away from root position. In second inversion, the 5th of the chord is on the bottom. And then above that we have our root. And finally the third. Finding the root of the chord is going to be important because it is a part of how we name triads. So when a triad is in root position like this, which you can recognize because all of these notes are spaces, we don't have a mix of both, and all of the notes are 1/3 apart, it's pretty easy to find the root because it's just the bottom note of the chord. So in this example, the root of our chord is going to be F sharp. Notice that I'm including the accidental when I name the root. That's going to be super important. But what about if I have something like this, where we're not in root position? We have a mix of lines and spaces, and this is a fourth, not a third. In order to find the root in this case, we're just going to have to first put this triad into root position. So what that means is we're going to, one by one, move the top note down an octave until we find ourselves in root position. So we're going to move this E flat down one octave. And ta-da, we've found root position. All of our notes are just lines, and they're each 1/3 apart from the next. So here's our root position, and that tells us that the root of this triad is E flat. That also tells us that this original example that we had here was in first inversion because it only took moving one note to get back to our root position. Here's another example. So it's not in root position, which we can tell because we have a mix of lines and spaces. So we're just going to move our top note down one octave. So our F sharp moves down by one octave. But we're still not in root position because we still have a mix of lines and spaces. So we need to move one more note down the octave. So we're going to take this D and move it down. And we have arrived at root position. So we have our thirds and they're all spaces now. We're happy. So that tells us that the root of our chord is D. It also tells us that we started in second inversion because it took moving two notes to get back to root position. So that means that this intermediate one was first inversion.
So that's all for this week. Let me know if you have any questions. Next week, we're going to start talking about the quality of triads. I know. You can't wait. Bye!